Today I'm going to give an example of making some fairy houses out of our stoneware clay for another project. The few examples here of just a little garden sculpture, gnome home, fairy house, something to go outside. These have not been glazed, but you can almost see the details a little bit better. This is sort of a squat one with a door, all sorts of texture, a leaf, chimney vines on top. And here's one that's actually more like a birdhouse with a bottom. Simpler. So the example of one with a form that we're going to be looking at today. Lots of texture, a little door, a little chimney and snail on top. So this project uses a slab of clay that you're going to roll out and a form that you're going to build over to give it some structure while you build and create the shape. This is a plastic cup that has a piece of paper taped around it. The paper is important to build on, so you can slip the cup out after you're done building and it won't stick to the clay. If the paper stays in, that's okay, but you don't want the cup to stick to the clay because then it won't come out. So this has its cup in here as a structure. This clay is still wet. As it begins to dry, the clay will shrink. So I'll make sure to pull this cup out before it gets too dry, or else it'll be very hard to come out and it can sometimes crack the clay because the clay will shrink around the cup. So that's an important thing to remember when you're done with this project using a form inside. So you have your form, and also in your kit you have a piece of paper, which is a template. This is the shape that you want your clay to be, so it fits exactly around this cup. This way it doesn't fit because it's upside down, but if you turn it this way, that's exactly the shape of the cup. So we start with a lump of clay. Flatten it as much as you can with your hands. And then you're going to roll this clay out. Now remember, we always work on a canvas mat so it won't stick to the table, except for when we're rolling with a rolling pin. So I'm going to move that mat for a minute and roll this clay out with a rolling pin to make a slab. And I move it every couple rolls so it's even all along the way. It doesn't get real thin on one side and stay thick on the other. You want to roll it till it's about 1/4 of an inch thick. Not too thin, not too thick. It doesn't have to be exact, but you want it to be a nice thin slab. Then you bring your canvas mat back over, and that's our work surface. And lay your slab on that. Now take your template, lay it on here so it fits, cutting tool, and you're going to cut around that shape, putting your scraps off to the side. Now you peel off your template and put that aside. Take your sponge. Now your sponges, you've gotten wet and you've squeezed the water out so it's just damp. It's not dripping wet. And that's what you use to smooth these edges with before you go any further. You can pick up your slab and smooth those ragged edges. Then this is the shape that will fit around your cup. Bring your plastic cup over and keep this paper on it, and it's going to wrap just perfectly around that shape. Again, sometimes you might start this way by accident and you think it's not gonna fit properly. If that happens, just turn your cup over, line it up, roll it on there, and there'll be a seam that you just blend together with your finger. You can put your hand inside the cup to give it some structure. And smooth that seam so you don't see it at all. And then you can even use your sponge to smooth it out a bit. And then that's your house bottom. Now think about what you might want that top of your fairy house to be. This one here has just sort of a leafy top. It almost looks like a flower. I just took a round piece of clay and shaped it a little bit. Just a natural form, because I think of a fairy house as being made out of natural things, so it doesn't have to be perfect, and stick it on there to make that kind of a top. But one fun thing to do this time of year when all the leaves are coming out, like I did in this example, is it has a leaf top. So then take whatever's left of your slab, or roll another one if you don't have enough. Then pick a leaf from outside. This is a hydrangea leaf, which work particularly well because they have lots of veins on the bottom. So take your leaf, and the veiny side you want touching the clay. Press it in there and give it a little roll. Now cut around the leaf, leaving it in there. And before you take the leaf out of the clay, take your sponge and wipe those edges clean with the leaf already still on there. And then carefully peel it off, and you've got all that beautiful leaf texture. So that can become a cool lid to your fairy house. Now remember, when you're attaching two pieces of clay together, you want to scratch and attach. So I'm going to scratch just some rough scratches on the top of there, and then just a few here that'll kind of line up to where it goes. Doesn't have to be exact. And then you take your slip, paint that on, lay this on, and kind of press it firmly, but not too firm. You don't want to mess up too much of the lines. And that is your roof. Now it's all about just decorating how you would like. Cutting a door, possibly. If you want to cut through, maybe draw it out first and then press a little harder to make an open door. Again, you're going to smooth your edges. But you don't necessarily need an open door. On this example, I just made a door out of clay that I put on and put some texture on it. I like putting chimneys. That's just a little, they can really look like anything. Just a little lump of your extra clay. Maybe put some texture on it to make it look like a twig or a branch or something. And then you're going to do scratch and attach again wherever you end up putting that chimney. And then other details. This is just kind of a knobbly texture, which I got by rolling one of the texturizing beads into the clay. Then some of your other beads will look like a flower if you push the side on, which is kind of nice in this kind of a project. This little coil, you can make things that look like vines, tendrils creeping around. That that, you just take a scrap of your clay and you're going to make a coil, which is laying a piece down and you roll with your fingers, pushing back and forth, lifting up every once in a while, and it gets thinner and thinner. Sometimes it gets too big and I break it in half so I can keep going and getting it thinner and thinner so it looks like a vine that then you can use to coil around your clay however you want. But remember, we want to attach that. So I might just take my tool and draw a line where it's going to go. Put a little of this and then press it on there. As I go. Then you can add little leaves or whatever. I also use the coil to make that tiny little snail on the top here. Got real thin, and then just coiled it up like that. Made sure to do my scratch and attach. This is the kind of thing that will fall off real easily. And press him on there to dry. And then you can just keep going. You can add more leaves, maybe smaller leaves. Other things outside make great textures too. Pine cones, when you press in, make an interesting texture. This is a little tiny twig from a grapevine, which is curly. Pressing that in gives kind of a cool curly shape. So there's really so much you can do. Now, if this were done, I would let it sit staying on the cup for a little while till it starts to get dry, kind of leather hard you call it, where the clay is still dark, but it's hard. You can't really form it anymore. And then at that point, you can slip that cup out and leave it be and let it dry the rest of the way like that. You don't want it to dry all the way on your cup, or you risk it cracking. Now, the other example I gave here is this, which looks more like a little birdhouse or something with a bottom. Now this, you just do exactly what we did with the fairy house, but when you get to the point where you're all done, you're going to roll out a little bit that will become the bottom. Lay your piece on top to use as the form of what size you need that. Just scratch lightly around it so you have the circle. Now cut it out all the way through and wipe your edges. Now before you put this on the bottom, this is super important, you do have to take that form out now, even though it's wet. Because once this is on the bottom, that cup is not going to come out. So you can take the form out, leave the paper, that's fine, or you can just kind of peel it out like that. And you're going to very gently, delicately put this bottom on there. Because this clay is wet and we want to be very gentle with it so it doesn't crumple. So do a little bit of scratch around the edge of your bottom. Put some slip on there, and then I'm gonna tuck that right on here. Set it down this way. And then as it's sitting on the mat, I'm going to go around and try to smooth those edges a little bit. This is a time where you can, if you have the time, just let your piece sit for a few minutes so it starts to dry a little bit. It's not quite so wet. And then pick it up and smooth blend this bottom part on. Make sure it's attached. And this can be delicate because this piece is very wiggly right now. You smooth that bottom part on. And again, you can let it dry for a little bit and then come back to it and smooth it more after a little while when it's easier to work with. That's only if you want a bottom on your piece. So, fairy houses this time of year are a really fun project because there's so many different things you can do on them. This one I scratched on with my stick this texture that makes it look like a log. And I added a little branch stump on there, just like we did with the chimney, but it looks more like a piece of wood. And these are some of the bead imprints on the sides. And a little top that almost looks like a beehive. Another tiny little leaf. Some different twig imprints. And then after we fire it once, we'll talk about putting color on it. You can make it all sorts of different colors, and then it can go out in your garden and decorate your fairy garden at home. Thanks.